What is going on, Panthers Nation? Carolina Dad here, your host of the Growls One Roar podcast. Hey, folks, if you're here, please hit that subscribe button. Today, we're going to be taking a look back at the number one overall quarterbacks over the last 12, 13, 14 years and look at how they panned out from year one to year two. Did we see improvements? Was there a significant leap? Was there a setback? Was there injury, which happened in some cases? And I know it's hard to say apples to apples. Hey, this is a good way to judge what Bryce Young could look like this year. But I think it's good to understand, like, what did it look like for these number one overall quarterbacks? Now, I know for a true comparison, we could probably go out here and, look at all the quarterbacks or at least first round quarterbacks. But I wanted to focus on number one overall quarterbacks because that's the shoes that Bryce Young has to live up to right now. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Taking a look here, we are using StatMuse today. Now, one thing you'll notice is I filtered to look at quarterbacks drafted number one overall. There are a few non-quarterbacks that are on this list. So we are only going to focus on the quarterbacks. And we're going to start with Matthew Stafford, 2009 first round number one overall pick. We'll move up through Sam Bradford, Cam Newton, Andrew Luck, Winston Golf, Mayfield, Murray, Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, and then take a look at Bryce Young. And hey, if you're here for Caleb Williams, we'll have that to look at next year as well. Here we go. Let's take a look at Matthew Stafford. In his rookie campaign, appeared in 10 games, 201 completions, 377 attempts, 53.3% completion percentage, 2,267 passing yards, 6 yards per attempt, 226.7 yards a game, 13 touchdowns to 20 interceptions with a 61.0 rating. He was sacked 24 times, ended up with 108 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 4 fumbles, and he lost one of those. You can't really do a year two look with Matthew Stafford because he suffered the injury in 2010, so only appeared in 3 games. But I guess we could take a look at the 2011 campaign. Appeared in all 16 games. I know it's technically year 3, so, it's not truly a year 1 to year 2 leap. But hey, let's take a look at it. 421 attempts, 663 completion, 663 attempts, 63.5 passer rating, 41.4. But man, Matthew Stafford was absolutely one of the bright spots among that team. Now, when we compare this, like I said, I don't think there's any way that you compare 2009 versus 2011. That was one heck of a jump. But I do think it does set the tone to say, hey, this number one overall pick is actually going to pan out. I know they were in a very pass-heavy offense. I don't think with Bryce Young, he's going to, put up these type of stats in his career. It's just not who he's going to be. At least I don't think he's going to be that when we talk about Dave Canales relying on the running game. So decent sample size to get us started. We'll move on to Sam Bradford, formerly drafted by the St. Louis Rams in 2010. In his rookie campaign, 16 games played, 354 attempts, 354 completions, 590 attempts, 60 completion percentage, 36.9 attempts per game, and threw a little over 3,500 passing yards, 6 yards per pass, 219 yards per game, 18 touchdowns to 15 interceptions, sacked 34 times, 1 rushing touchdown, 63 rushing yards. Year 2, we saw a drop-off, and I do know he sustained some injuries during his career, but he only appeared in 10 games, 191 completions to 357 attempts, 53.5 completion percentage, so almost 7% drop-off there. 2,164 yards. Apples to apples, you can't really compare that because he didn't play in 6 of the games. fell off about 3 yards per game. It's not a significant drop in yards per game if he were to, sustain the same average if he did play the other six. 6 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. Definitely a drop off in the number of passing touchdowns. And then a passer rating fell as well, 70.5. Sacked 36 times. So played in 6 less games, but sacked 2 more times. So 36 times. That would have been a pretty bad year, I'm guessing. Fumbled the ball 10 times, lost 7 of those fumbles. So we see Matthew Stafford hurt. We see Sam Bradford having a setback. And then, hey, we're going to move on to one of the best quarterbacks, probably the best quarterback. I don't know if you put Jake Delhomme in that bucket, but Cam Newton. We'll take a look at his 2011 to 2012 campaign for the Carolina Panthers. Down memory lane. 310 attempts. Oh my, this is just rough, man. 310 completions to 517 attempts, 60% completion percentage, about 32 passing attempts per game, 4,051 passing yards, 7.8 average, throwing for 253 per game, 21 to 17, touchdown to interception ratio, 84.5 passer rating, sacked 35 times, rushed the ball for 706 yards, so almost 4,800, close to 4,800 yards of offense, 14 rushing touchdowns, monster, 5 fumbles, and he did lose 2 of those. So we know rushing wise, Bryce Young isn't going to put up those type of numbers. This was one of the best. I mean, looking at his stats, that was his best passing season as a Carolina Panther. His rookie season, putting up that 4,000 yard mark, did not eclipse 4,000 yards the rest of his career. So taking a look at the 2012 campaign for Cam Newton, we have 280 completions to 485 attempts, so drop off in completion percentage by about 3%. Threw the ball a little bit less, 30 attempts per game, and a drop off in yards, but not significant. 3,869 yards passing, 8 yards per attempt, a little uptick there, 241 yards per game, and then 19 to 12 on the touchdown to interception ratio, 86.2 rating. So did increase his passer rating. 741 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns. Small drop in number of touchdowns. Did have a few more fumbles. But solid year. Looking at year 1 to year 2 for Cam Newton, I think it shows, when we sit here and think about Carolina's, I look at Cam Newton's rookie season as more of my measuring stick for not rushing yards and not passing yards, but what success could look like for Bryce Young and the Carolinas heading into his second year in the NFL. So a little bit drop off from Cam, but not significant. I'd say he remained pretty steady between his first and second year. Next on the list, we have another stellar quarterback and a career that was ended way too early. But take a looking at Andrew Luck, who likely up there with Cam Newton is one of the top 10 rookie seasons by an NFL quarterback. I think CJ Stroud's in that conversation. Let's take a look here. 339 completions to 627 attempts, 54.1% completion percentage, 4,374 passing yards, 7 yards per attempt, 23 touchdowns to 18 interceptions, 76.5 passer rating, sacked 41 times, had 5 rushing touchdowns, 10 fumbles. He lost 5 of those and 255 rushing yards. In year 2, a drop off in total yards, 3,822, but completion percentage did go up by almost 6%, 60.2. Yards per game dropped a little bit, but that 23-9 touchdown to interception ratio drastically improved his rating to 87.0, 4.0 touchdown to interception, or 4 to 1.6 touchdown to interception ratio. Sacks went down. When we look at year 2 for Bryce Young, I think that 23-9, 24-9, 25-9 range is something that I'm looking for. And then 3,500 to 3,600, maybe 3,700 passing yards for Bryce Young would be a successful year. We move on to what was a division rival for quite a bit, Jameis Winston. Man, did that dude light it up, the 30-30 man at one point in his career. But looking at the 2015 campaign, 312 completions to 535 attempts. He had a 58.3% completion percentage. Threw for 4,042 yards, 7.6 yards per pass, 252 yards per game, 22 to 15 touchdown to interception ratio, 84.2 rating, sacked 27 times, 213 rushing yards, and 6 touchdowns. In the 16 campaign, completion percentage improved by about 2%, a little over 2%. Passing yards went up just a hair at 4,090. Average pass attempt 7.2, dropped a little bit. Yards per game increased. Touchdown to interception ratio did not improve, 28 to 18. Well, I guess it did improve just a little bit. I said didn't improve, but it did. You have a 10 gap margin between the touchdown to interception. And passer rating increased to 86.1. Was sacked a few more times at 35 and did have one rushing touchdown, 165 rushing yards. I mean, the other big thing with a lot of these is we are not seeing a lot of these rookie quarterbacks being sacked. Being able to stay up and healthy and on your feet it'll do a lot of good things for you. And I hope that's another thing that we get to see out of Bryce Young this year. We have Jared Goff, whose career has been resurrected in Detroit. But let's take a look at his rookie campaign into his second year. Appeared in 7 games, 112 completions, 205 attempts, 54.6 completion percentage. Threw for 1,000 yards, a little over 1,000 yards, 5.3 per attempt, 5 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. I'm sure some folks probably thought he was a bust. Sacked 26 times and had 1 rushing touchdown on 16 yards. So working his way into the system. And then in 2017, not terrible. Honestly, a pretty good year. Appeared in 15 games, 296 completions, 477 attempts, 62.1 rating. Completion percentage, 3,800 passing yards. That is quite the jump. I know he appeared in half the number of games in 16, but that's very significant. 8 yards per pass, 253 yards per game, 28 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. Man, imagine if we could get that out of Bryce Young. And 100.5 passer rating. Only sacked 25 times. Again, the consistent measure of success for these quarterbacks, young rookie quarterbacks, is not getting sacked. Not getting sacked as much as what we saw last year out of Bryce Young. Take a look at Baker Mayfield, who's also been resurrected now in Tampa Bay, bounced around a few times, was in Carolina for a few games. Let's look at his 18 to 19 campaign. In 2018, 310 completions to 486 attempts, 63.8 completion percentage, 3,700 passing yards, 7.7 yards per attempt, 266 yards per game. Really good stats. 27 touchdowns to 14 interceptions, 93.7 passer rating, only sacked 25 times, and 131 rushing yards. In his second season, 317 completions to 534 attempts, 59.4% completion percentage, so a drop of about 4, close to 4%. Passing yards remain the same, but played in more games, so you would have expected it to increase a little bit there. But 239 yards per game, 22 touchdowns to 21 interceptions, 78.8 passer rating. So passer rating dropped off. I won't say the worst in his career, because 22 with Carolina for that half of the season was part of that, but did see a drop, and sacked 40 times. So increase in sacks, but had 3 rushing touchdowns. We'll move on to a quarterback that's probably, like, out of all the quarterbacks we talked about, maybe Baker Mayfield would be in that conversation for similar size. Kyler Murray, absolutely in that conversation. So let's take a look. A little more mobile. So let's see, in 2019, 64.4% completion percentage, 3,722 passing yards, 6.9 yards per pass, 20 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, and 87.4 passer rating. Was sacked 48 times, so pretty similar to what we saw in Bryce Young, and had 4 rushing touchdowns, 544 yards rushing. Year 2, increase in completion percentage, 67.2 completion percentage, almost 4,000 passing yards, 3,971, 7.1 yards per attempt, 26 touchdowns to 12 interceptions with a 94.3 passer rating. Sacked only 27 times. That's what we want to see this year. 20, 27, 30, like get it in the 30s. That's a significant improvement for Bryce Young in this offense. And he, lit things up with his legs. 819 rushing yards, 11 rushing touchdowns in his 2020 campaign. I do think comparing these two, if Bryce Young could jump up into, a similar stat line to this in his second year in the NFL, I think that would be a big improvement, minus the sacks. Like if we could get the sacks into the 30s, like I mentioned. All right, Joe Burrow, who also has battled injuries. Let's take a look and compare between his rookie campaign and the second year. In his first season, 65.3% completion percentage, 2,688 passing yards, 6.7 yards per attempt, 268 yards per game, 13 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, 89.8 rating, sacked 32 times. So he, early on in his career, he was sacked quite a bit. 3 rushing touchdowns. In his second season, coming back from injury, saw almost a 5% increase in completion percentage. 70% of passes completed is big. 4,600 passing yards. I mean, again, I don't think we'll see those numbers out of Bryce Young this year. 8.9 yards per attempt, and it does help when you have a very stout receiving core. 288 yards a game, 34 touchdowns to 14 interceptions, 108.3 passer rating. We did see him sacked 51 times. Again, that's a number we don't want to see for Bryce Young in year 2, and then 2 rushing touchdowns. It's been a bumpy career for Joe Burrow, coming off another injury this season, heading into next year. But I mean, looking at that jump from year 1 to year 2 and coming off an injury, I think, if we could see something similar for Bryce Young, and again, not at that level, that'd be a big improvement. Now, this is a quarterback, although size-wise, these guys aren't the same when we talk about a Bryce Young and a Trevor Lawrence. However, the situations are pretty consistent when we look at Trevor Lawrence's rookie season, the turmoil there with Urban Meyer and all the things that surrounded it could probably be pretty closely aligned to what Bryce Young saw with Frank Reich in this team last year. So looking back in the 21 campaign, 59.6 completion percentage, 3,600 passing yards, 12 touchdowns to 17 interceptions, with a 71.9 rating, and sacked 32 times. Let's take a look at his rushing, 334 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Year 2, you bring in a coach, a true proven NFL coach that's able to lead, and we see jumps in almost every category. Almost a 7% increase in completion percentage. A lot of that also can be attributed, again, to getting weapons around him, which is what we've seen with Bryce Young in year 2. 4,113 passing yards, 7 yards per attempt, 241 yards a game. Really improved that touchdown to interception ratio. What I'd love to see for Bryce, 25.8, 95.2 passer rating, 291 rushing yards, and 5 touchdowns. Again, when we talk and try to compare quarterbacks, it's never going to be the same, but talking about what Trevor Lawrence went through and what Bryce Young just went through, I think it's probably the closest case study that we would have with NFL quarterbacks to, hey, take a look at. And I've covered this numerous times, but I think, hey, let's take a look at Bryce Young's rookie campaign, which wasn't the greatest. 300, or let's look at the 315 completions, 59.8% completion percentage. Again, if we get this up to 64, 65, passing yards, I mean, it's not good. A lot of that had to do with weapons and protection, but 2,800 passing yards, 179 yards per game, 5.5 per attempt, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 73.7 passer rating, sacked 62 times. That amounted to 477 sack yards. That's how many yards based off of being sacked. 253 yards rushing. He did not have a rushing touchdown. Didn't mean to hit that. But taking a look at what we just saw, we can only hope that moving into this season with everything that Bryce has been given around him, the stability, the coaching staff, Dave Canales to help develop him, that we see a significant improvement from Bryce Young. And that's all that we can ask for as fans right now. Anyways, folks, that is going to do it for today's episode. This is Carolina Dad. Y'all have a good one.